Nicole Rivers had dealt with hundreds of rude clients before, but none had managed to get under her skin quite like the man on the phone that Thursday afternoon. "Listen," his voice cut through her headset, smooth but sharp as glass. "If your team can't handle a simple request, maybe I should take my business somewhere else." Nicole clenched her jaw, her eyes flicking to the clock. 5:58 p.m. 2 minutes before she could finally escape another exhausting day at Aurora Dynamics, one of the city's biggest tech firms. "I understand your frustration, sir," she replied, forcing her voice into the same calm tone she'd perfected over the years. "But you missed the confirmation deadline for that order, and our system automatically." "Automatically nothing," he snapped. "Maybe if you people actually read your own policies." Nicole cut him off. "Sir, if you continue speaking to me like that, I'll have to end the call." There was a pause, a stunned silence. Then, a low, humorless laugh. "You're brave. I'll give you that." The line went dead. Nicole exhaled, rubbing her temples. She typed quickly into her report system. Client displayed aggressive tone and personal disrespect. Recommended review. Then she hit send and shut down her computer. For the first time in a long while, she left the office angry. Not because of the man's rudeness, but because she could still hear his voice echoing in her head. Arrogant, cold, unapologetic. The next morning, the company's Slack chat was buzzing before she even logged in. "New VP coming in today. Big meeting with the exec team. Rumor is he's the owner's son." Nicole sipped her coffee, unimpressed. The last thing she needed was another privileged heir pretending to revolutionize corporate culture. She rolled her eyes and opened her inbox, only to find an urgent message from HR. Subject: Mandatory meeting, 10 a.m. Location: Executive Conference Room. Attendees: Nicole Rivers, HR Director, Vice President Brian Cole. Her stomach dropped. Wait, Cole? The name from the client file she'd written the complaint about yesterday flashed in her mind. Brian Cole. No, couldn't be. The same man? Her pulse picked up. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Cole was a common name. Maybe Nicole, her manager, Jasmine, whispered from the doorway. "They want you upstairs. Now." The conference room was large, all glass and steel, with a view that screamed power. The HR director, a polite but distant woman named Sylvia, greeted her with a stiff smile. And then he turned around. Brian Cole. He was even more disarming in person. Tall, sharp suit, eyes like winter sky. Recognition flickered between them for the briefest moment, though his expression gave nothing away. "Miss Rivers," he said calmly, as if they'd never spoken before. "Please have a seat." Her heart pounded. He knows. He has to know. Sylvia cleared her throat. "We received your complaint yesterday regarding a client interaction." She hesitated, glancing at Brian. "As it turns out, that client was Mr. Cole here, our new Vice President of Operations." Nicole's stomach twisted. I see." Brian folded his hands on the table. "I owe you an apology, Miss Rivers. I didn't know I was speaking with one of our own employees. My tone was unacceptable," Nicole said before she could stop herself. The HR director froze. Brian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Yes," he said evenly. "Unacceptable. You were right to file the report." That wasn't what she expected. She'd prepared for anger, maybe even humiliation. But not this cool, composed man who seemed intrigued. Sylvia gave a relieved smile. "Well, since that's resolved." "Actually," Brian interrupted, "I'd like Miss Rivers to assist me on the client satisfaction overhaul project. I read her report. It was concise, assertive, and honest. I need that kind of perspective." Nicole blinked. "You want me to work with you?" He nodded, completely serious. "Starting today." Her mind raced. Was this some kind of punishment? Power move? Or something else entirely? "Of course," she said quietly. "If that's what the company needs." Brian stood. "Good. I'll see you at 2." He left the room, leaving behind a faint trace of cologne. Something subtle but impossible to ignore. At her desk, Nicole tried to bury herself in work, but whispers followed her. Did you hear? She's working with the new VP. She's the one who filed that complaint, right? He's not going to make her life easy. Jasmine stopped by with 2 coffees and a look of disbelief. You're serious? You're working with him? Nicole nodded. Apparently. Jasmine leaned closer. Girl, that man looks like trouble wrapped in a 3-piece suit. You better keep it professional. Nicole smirked. Always. But inside, she wasn't so sure. At exactly 2 o'clock, she walked into Brian's office. It was modern, immaculate, the kind of place where even the plants looked expensive. He was standing by the window, scrolling through something on his tablet. When he looked up, his eyes lingered on her just a fraction too long. Right on time, he said. I like that. Old habit, she replied. Comes from years of working under managers who measure your worth by your punctuality. A faint smile curved his lips. Then you'll find I'm less rigid than most. Hard to tell, she said, crossing her arms. Our last conversation didn't exactly scream flexibility. Brian chuckled softly. Fair. I was having a bad day. Everyone has bad days, Nicole said, her tone sharp. Not everyone decides to take it out on strangers. He studied her, really studied her, as if trying to decide whether to be offended or impressed. You're direct. I respect that. She raised an eyebrow. Most people don't. I'm not most people. The air between them thickened. For a second, neither spoke. Then Brian broke the silence. Let's start with your assessment of our current customer process. Be honest. Nicole hesitated, then nodded. You sure you can handle honesty? Try me. So she did, bluntly, thoroughly, without softening a single word. Brian listened, occasionally asking questions, sometimes smiling at her boldness. When she finally stopped, he leaned back. You're either very brave or very reckless, Miss Rivers. Maybe both, she said. He gave a quiet laugh. Good. I could use a little of that. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted. It wasn't just about work anymore. There was an undercurrent, subtle but undeniable. A pull. As she packed her notebook, Brian said, For what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier. You were right to call me out. Nicole paused. Why do I feel like you're not used to people doing that? He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Because I'm not. She held his gaze a second too long, then looked away. Well, you'd better get used to it. As she walked out, her heart was racing again. But not from fear this time. From something she couldn't name. Behind her, Brian watched, that same amused look returning to his eyes. Interesting, he murmured to himself. Very interesting. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Every morning, Nicole would step into Brian's office with her notebook, laptop, and a silent prayer not to say something that could be taken the wrong way. Working directly under him wasn't what she'd call comfortable. It was intense, unpredictable, and at times, far too personal. Brian wasn't a typical executive. He didn't hide behind layers of protocol. He challenged her ideas, questioned her reports, and, to her reluctant admiration, actually listened to her answers. Still, his presence unnerved her. When he focused, his entire attention was a spotlight. He didn't just look at you, he saw you. It was infuriating. By Thursday, they'd already clashed 3 times. Customer retention is built on emotional engagement, she said, gesturing to her slides. Not just fancy upgrades and loyalty programs. Brian leaned back in his chair, studying her. Emotion doesn't drive profits. Systems do. Nicole sighed. Then maybe that's why our clients are leaving, because they feel like data points, not people. A smirk played on his lips. Are you always this fearless in meetings? Only when I'm right. He chuckled softly, and it did something strange to her chest, like a spark she wasn't ready for. The tension between them wasn't just professional anymore. It was electric, subtle, and dangerous. That evening, when everyone else had left, Nicole was still at her desk, polishing a report Brian wanted on his desk by morning. The office was quiet, the soft hum of computers and the low city noise outside. She heard footsteps. Still here. Brian's voice drifted from behind her. She turned, startled. You too. He smiled faintly, setting his jacket over the back of a chair. You didn't strike me as someone who leaves things half done. I don't, she said. And you didn't strike me as someone who works past 9. I've been told I'm full of surprises. She gave him a skeptical look. Let me guess. That's what you tell all your employees. Only the ones who file complaints against me, he replied, his tone teasing. Nicole's lips twitched, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. You really enjoy reminding me of that, don't you? I enjoy watching you pretend you're not still embarrassed about it. She rolled her eyes and returned to her computer. I'm not embarrassed. I stand by what I said. I know, he said quietly. That's what I like about you. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. When Nicole finally looked up, Brian was watching her. Not as a boss, but as a man. For a second, the world outside the glass office walls disappeared. Then her computer dinged, breaking the moment. I should send this, she said quickly. Of course. Brian straightened his cuffs, clearing his throat. There's a client presentation tomorrow. I want you to lead it. Her head snapped up. What? Me? You know the data better than anyone, he said simply. And you're the only one who can speak with that kind of conviction. Clients trust conviction. I'm not exactly in upper management, she pointed out. Then consider this a test. Nicole frowned. And if I fail? His eyes softened. You won't. The next morning, she stood in front of a long glass table filled with executives and clients, her pulse racing. Brian sat beside her, calm and confident, like he'd done this 1,000 times. Nicole began her presentation. Her voice wavered at first, but as she spoke, about the company's vision, the human side of customer experience, the need for empathy in technology, her nerves faded. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one of the clients, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, nodded slowly. That, he said, was refreshing. Another smiled. You've convinced me to reconsider our contract. Nicole exhaled, hardly believing it. She turned to Brian. His expression didn't show pride or surprise, just quiet satisfaction. After the meeting, as they walked down the hall, he said, You were brilliant. Thanks, she murmured, still dazed. You set me up, didn't you? In a good way, he said. Sometimes people need to be thrown into deep water to realize they can swim. She laughed under her breath. You're lucky I didn't drown. I wouldn't have let you. The way he said it, low, certain, made something flutter inside her that she didn't want to acknowledge. Later that day, as the office buzzed with post-meeting chatter, Jasmine nearly tackled Nicole near the elevators. Girl, you just owned that presentation. Everyone's talking about it. Nicole smiled shyly. Don't exaggerate. Even the execs from upstairs are impressed. And Brian, Jasmine leaned closer. He couldn't take his eyes off you. Nicole froze. He was just evaluating my performance. Sure, Jasmine said with a grin. Keep telling yourself that. Nicole shook her head, laughing, but the heat rising to her cheeks betrayed her. That evening, as she gathered her things, she noticed a note on her desk. A folded piece of paper with her name, written in sharp, clean handwriting. Inside, great work today. Dinner's on me. Consider it a professional debrief. 8 p.m. The Ivy Room. Brian. Her heart skipped. Professional debrief. Right. She could handle that. She stared at the note for a long minute before slipping it into her bag. The Ivy Room was quiet, elegant, and far too expensive for her taste. When she arrived, Brian was already seated near the window, the city lights reflected in the glass behind him. You came, he said as she sat down. You made it sound like an order, she replied. Did it work? Apparently. Faint smile. I'll remember that. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Conversation flowed about work, travel, even music. Nicole learned he'd studied abroad, worked in multiple countries, and had only returned because his father wanted him to take over operations. "You don't sound thrilled about it," she said. He swirled his wine. "Let's just say running a company you didn't build doesn't feel like an achievement." "Then build your own," she said simply. He looked up, curious. "Is that what you'd do?" "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's." Brian smiled faintly. "You really don't hold back, do you?" "No," she said. "I've learned that silence protects everyone except the person who stays quiet." He nodded slowly, almost approvingly. "That's admirable." Their eyes met again. The restaurant's soft lighting made everything feel slower, warmer. Then Brian said quietly, "For the record, Nicole, I'm glad you filed that complaint." She blinked. "You are?" "Yes. Otherwise, I might never have met you." Her pulse jumped. "That sounds dangerously unprofessional." He leaned slightly forward, voice low. "Maybe, but it's true." Nicole stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or leave. "You know this is a terrible idea, right?" He smirked. "Probably, but tell me you don't feel it too." She hesitated. She should have said no. She wanted to say no, but the words never came. Instead, she whispered, "I'll see you at work, Mr. Cole." And with that, she stood, leaving him watching her. A small, knowing smile on his lips. When she stepped into the night, the cool air hit her face, grounding her again. She hated to admit it, but Jasmine was right. Brian Cole was trouble. The kind of trouble you couldn't walk away from, even when you knew you should. By Monday morning, Nicole had convinced herself that Friday night hadn't meant anything. It was just dinner, a debrief, a coincidence wrapped in candlelight and wine. But then Brian walked into the office. He didn't say anything at first, just passed by her desk on the way to a meeting, offering a small nod and a faint smile. But the way his eyes lingered made her pulse skip. It was a silent reminder that whatever had started between them wasn't just in her imagination. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that look. Calm, unreadable, yet full of something unspoken. That afternoon, they had to review a proposal together in his office. The tension between them was almost tangible. "Your revisions are sharp," Brian said, flipping through her notes. "You see angles most people miss." "Occupational hazard," she replied, keeping her tone dry. He glanced up. "Hazard. When you care too much about doing things right, it tends to make people uncomfortable." Brian gave a low laugh. "Maybe that's why I like working with you." Nicole froze for half a second, pretending to type something. "You should probably stop saying things like that." "Why?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. "Because someone might overhear and misunderstand." He leaned back in his chair. "And what would they misunderstand, exactly?" "That you're flirting with me," she said flatly. The silence that followed was almost electric. Finally, Brian smiled, slow and deliberate. "Maybe I am." Nicole's heart skipped again. "You're impossible. Only when I see something or someone I can't ignore." She stood abruptly, closing her laptop. "We should stay focused, Mr. Cole." "Brian," he corrected softly. "Mr. Cole," she repeated, meeting his gaze. "We work together." He sighed, almost smiling. For now. Over the next few weeks, their project took over everything. Late nights, working lunches, endless calls. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to keep things strictly professional. There were moments, tiny, charged moments, that made her breath hitch. The way his hand brushed hers when they both reached for a document. The rare, unguarded laugh he let out when she teased him about his perfectionism. The quiet way he'd watch her when he thought she wasn't looking. And every time it happened, Nicole reminded herself of the rules. No personal attachments. No office relationships. No mistakes. She had worked too hard to be taken seriously to risk it all over a man, even one who made her feel more alive than she'd felt in years. One night, as rain poured outside the office windows, they were the only two left. Papers scattered across the conference table, cold coffee in half-empty cups, the glow of city lights reflecting off the glass. Nicole was finishing a report when she felt his gaze. "You should go home," she said without looking up. "So should you," he replied. She sighed, tapping the keyboard. "If I leave, this won't get done." He walked around the table, stopping beside her chair. "You've been carrying too much of this project on your own. You don't have to prove yourself." She looked up. "It's not about proving anything. It's about doing it right." Brian studied her face for a long moment, then reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Nicole froze. The gesture was simple, almost innocent. But his touch was warm, his fingers brushing her skin just long enough to make her heart stumble. "Brian," she whispered. He dropped his hand, stepping back. "Sorry, that was unprofessional." "You think," he smiled faintly, "you make it difficult to stay professional." Her pulse was racing, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then maybe we should stop working late." "Maybe," he said, "but I'd miss these nights." She grabbed her coat, ignoring the way her hands trembled. "Good night, Mr. Cole." "Good night, Nicole." As she left, she didn't see the way he watched her go, with a look that was equal parts admiration and regret. The next morning, Nicole came in early to avoid him. She needed distance, time to remember who she was before this dangerous connection started to unravel her focus. But fate had other plans. An email from upper management hit her inbox. Subject: Client Expansion Project. Assigned leads: Brian Cole, VP, and Nicole Rivers, project lead. She groaned out loud. Jasmine leaned over from the next desk. "You okay?" Nicole forced a smile. "Yeah, just more work." Jasmine gave her a knowing look. "More Brian, you mean?" Nicole glared. "Don't start." "I'm just saying," Jasmine whispered. "The man's eyes follow you like you owe him something." Nicole laughed weakly. "Yeah, a formal apology for ever filing that complaint." Later that week, they flew out for a 2-day client conference in Chicago. It was supposed to be strictly business, meetings, presentations, networking. But from the moment they checked into the hotel, it was clear that keeping distance would be impossible. During a team dinner, one of the clients made a comment, half joke, half flirtation, directed at Nicole. She handled it gracefully, but Brian's jaw tightened. When the man's hand brushed her arm a second time, Brian's voice cut through the conversation. "I think that's enough, don't you?" The table went silent. Nicole blinked, stunned. "Brian." He turned to her, tone firm but calm. "You don't have to tolerate that." The client mumbled an apology and excused himself. After dinner, Nicole confronted him in the hotel lobby. "What was that?" "I don't like seeing people disrespect you," he said simply. "I can handle myself." "I know you can, but that doesn't mean I'll stand by and watch." His sincerity disarmed her. For the first time, she saw past the arrogance, saw the man underneath. Someone who cared, even if he didn't know how to show it properly. "Brian," she said softly, "you can't keep doing that. People will start to talk." "Let them," he said. She shook her head. "You don't understand. You're the VP. I'm just—" He stepped closer. "You're not just anything." Her heart pounded. The space between them seemed to shrink with every breath. "Brian, please," she whispered. He hesitated, his expression torn. "You're right. I'm crossing lines I shouldn't." "Then don't." "I'm trying," he said quietly. "But every time I look at you, I forget why I should." Nicole turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe we shouldn't look at each other at all." He didn't answer. They stood there for a long moment. Two people caught between what they wanted and what they knew they couldn't have. Finally, Brian exhaled. "Get some rest, Nicole. We'll finish the presentation in the morning." She nodded and walked toward the elevators, her reflection trembling in the mirrored walls. That night, she lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. She knew this was dangerous. She knew she should stop it now before it went too far. But her heart didn't listen to logic. It only remembered his voice, his eyes, and the way her name sounded when he said it. And deep down, she realized something she didn't want to admit. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the beginning of something she couldn't control. The flight back from Chicago was quiet. Nicole sat by the window, staring at the clouds, pretending to read a report. Brian was beside her, absorbed in his laptop, though she could feel his attention drift toward her now and then. Neither spoke about what had happened in the hotel lobby, about the way he'd stood up for her, about the tension that had nearly tipped into something irreversible. When the plane landed, they exchanged polite words and went their separate ways, colleagues again, or at least pretending to be. But the silence between them was heavier than words. Back at the office, things began to change. People noticed. Whispers started in the break room, spread through Slack chats, floated in corners of meetings. They're spending a lot of time together. She's the only one he talks to like that. You think that's how she got promoted to project lead? Nicole heard the rumors. She pretended she didn't. But every careless laugh, every lingering glance from Brian made them sound louder. One afternoon, she overheard two coworkers in the hallway. Did you hear? Cole's playing favorites again. With who? Nicole Rivers. Who else? Her stomach twisted. She turned the corner before they could see her, breathing deeply. It wasn't fair. She'd worked harder than anyone, earned every task, every late night. But suddenly, all of that meant nothing. That evening, she went to Brian's office, closing the door behind her. We need to talk, she said, her voice steady but cold. He looked up from his screen. I assume this isn't about the quarterly report. It's about us, she said. Or whatever people think us is. He frowned slightly. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. The rumors, the stares, the way people look at me now. Brian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. People talk, Nicole. That's what they do. Not like this, she shot back. They think I'm sleeping my way into promotions, that everything I've worked for is because of you. His expression softened. You know that's not true. Doesn't matter, she said, her voice trembling. They believe it. Brian stood, moving closer. Then I'll talk to them. I'll shut it down. She shook her head. You'll only make it worse. You're the boss. They'll think you're protecting me. He hesitated, then said quietly, Maybe I am. Nicole blinked. Brian, I can't stand watching them talk about you like that, he said, his voice low and tense. You don't deserve it. You deserve respect. And if I have to, stop, she said sharply. Please, don't make this harder than it already is. For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them felt heavy, fragile, dangerous. Then Nicole turned away. We need boundaries. I know. Real ones. I know, he repeated, though his voice betrayed him, soft, reluctant, aching. She didn't look back when she left his office. The next week, Aurora Dynamics hosted its annual company gala, an elegant, formal event held in the grand ballroom of the city's Skyline Hotel. Nicole didn't want to go. She hated small talk, fake smiles, and the way people whispered behind champagne glasses. But Jasmine insisted. You can't skip it, Jasmine said, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Exactly why I shouldn't. Come on. You worked too hard on that client project to hide now. Show them who you are. Nicole sighed. Fine, but only for an hour. When she arrived, the room glittered with soft lights and polished ambition. People mingled, laughed too loudly, exchanged compliments that meant nothing. She spotted Brian near the center of the room, surrounded by executives. He looked perfect, composed, confident, completely at ease. And when his eyes found hers across the crowd, the noise around her faded. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her. You look... His voice trailed off for a second before he recovered. Professional. Nicole smirked. That's a safe word. It's the only one I can say without HR filing a complaint. Funny, she said, considering I'm the one who started that trend. They both laughed quietly, and for a moment it felt easy again. But then a familiar voice interrupted them. Brian. A tall, silver-haired man approached, authoritative, dressed in an impeccable suit. His presence demanded attention. Nicole recognized him instantly from the company's website. Richard Cole, founder and CEO. Brian's father. Dad, Brian said, his tone careful. This is Nicole Rivers, our project lead. Richard shook her hand with a polite smile. Ah, the famous Miss Rivers. I've heard quite a bit about you. Nicole's pulse quickened. All good things, I hope. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Depends on who you ask. Before she could respond, he turned to Brian. A word, son. The two men stepped aside, their voices low but tense. Nicole pretended not to watch, though she caught fragments. Too close with staff. Appearances matter. You're not ready for this role if you can't separate business and personal. Brian's shoulders stiffened. His father's voice was sharp, commanding, the tone of a man who'd built an empire and expected obedience. When Brian returned, his jaw was tight. Everything okay? Nicole asked quietly. Fine, he said. Just my father reminding me who signs the checks. Brian, let's just enjoy the evening, he said quickly, forcing a smile. But the light in his eyes was gone. Later that night, Nicole stepped outside onto the balcony, needing air. The city glittered below, indifferent and alive. She heard footsteps behind her. Escaping the party? Brian's voice asked softly. Something like that. He joined her at the railing, the cool breeze ruffling his hair. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Nicole said, He doesn't approve, does he? Brian didn't answer right away. He doesn't approve of anything that isn't his idea. And you? I don't need his approval. But you still want it, she said gently. He exhaled, leaning on the railing. You have no idea what it's like growing up under someone who already decided who you're supposed to be. Nicole turned to look at him. The mask was gone now. No charm, no arrogance, just a man weighed down by expectations. I know what it's like to be underestimated, she said quietly. Different reasons, same feeling. He looked at her then, really looked. You always surprise me. Before she could reply, thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and light. Guess that's our cue to go inside, Nicole said, smiling faintly. But Brian didn't move. Nicole. There was something in his tone that stopped her. He stepped closer, his voice low. I can't keep pretending that this is just work. Her breath caught. Brian. I tried to ignore it. I tried to stay professional. But every time I see you, I forget the rules. The rain came harder now, soaking through her dress, but she didn't move. Say something, he whispered. Nicole's heart was racing. We'll ruin everything. Maybe some things are worth ruining. Before she could stop herself, she reached for him. Or maybe he reached for her. And suddenly, his hands were on her waist, her palms on his chest, the world around them blurring into the sound of rain and thunder. The kiss was inevitable, fierce, desperate, the kind that makes you forget consequences. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, the air felt different. We can't, Nicole said softly. I know, but neither stepped away. The morning after the gala, Nicole arrived at work to a silence that felt wrong. People turned away as she walked by. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Screens flicked off when she passed. By the time she reached her desk, her phone was buzzing with messages. Anonymous. You and Cole, huh? Didn't take long. Another, bold move, kissing your boss in front of half the company. Her breath caught. Someone had seen them. She opened her laptop. There it was, a photo taken through the rain-smeared glass of the balcony doors. Blurry, but unmistakable. Brian's hand on her waist, her face tilted up toward him. The caption beneath it on the company's internal message board read, Aurora's real power couple? Her heart dropped into her stomach. By noon, she was called to HR. Sylvia, the HR director, looked as though she'd aged 10 years overnight. Nicole, I need you to understand how serious this is. I didn't. I believe you, Sylvia said softly. But this isn't just about you. It's about company reputation. We've received directives from the executive board. Nicole's voice shook. What kind of directives? Sylvia exhaled. Mr. Cole Sr. has requested an internal review, effective immediately. Of course he had. Brian's office door was closed, blinds drawn. When she finally gathered the courage to knock, his voice called from inside. Come in. He looked exhausted, the crisp perfection of his usual appearance replaced with dark circles and undone sleeves. They're going after you, aren't they? She asked. He shook his head. They're going after us. Nicole crossed her arms. You mean your father? Brian didn't deny it. He called me this morning, said I've embarrassed the company, that I've proven him right, that I'm reckless, emotional, unfit to lead. Her chest tightened. What did you tell him? That I love you. Nicole froze. You what? I told him the truth, that I care about you, and that I won't end this because of a headline. Her pulse raced. Brian, no. You can't. I won't let him dictate my life anymore. Brian, listen to me. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. If you fight him, you'll lose everything, your position, your future here. You've worked for this your entire life. So what? He said fiercely. What's the point if I have to become someone I hate to keep it? Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. You don't understand. I can survive losing this job. You can't survive losing who you are to him. I've already lost that, he whispered. She shook her head. No, you can still fix this. You can tell them it was nothing, that it's over. They'll believe you. I won't lie, he said. Not about you. Then I'll do it, she said suddenly. His eyes widened. What? I'll take the blame. I'll say it was my fault, that I misunderstood things. Don't you dare, he said sharply. I won't let you. You don't get to decide this for me, she said, her voice trembling. If one of us has to walk away, it should be me. Nicole. She turned toward the door, unable to look at him. You have a company to save. I just have a reputation. That's easier to rebuild. Nicole, please, he said quietly, his voice cracking. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. By the end of the week, the official email went out. Effective immediately. Nicole Rivers has chosen to resign from her position at Aurora Dynamics. We thank her for her service and wish her success in future endeavors. No explanations. No farewell party. Just a clean erasure like she'd never been there. Brian tried to call, messages, emails, visits. She ignored them all. The more she tried to let him go, the harder it became. But she knew staying would destroy them both. So she disappeared. 3 months later, Aurora Dynamics was on every news feed again. The board had forced Richard Cole into retirement, and Brian had taken over as acting CEO. From the outside, he looked untouchable. Confident, powerful, colder than ever. But at night, when the office lights dimmed, he'd still look out over the city and think about her. About the complaint that had started it all. About the woman who'd seen him not as an heir or a name, but as a man. He'd once thought success meant proving his father wrong. Now he realized it meant nothing without her. It was a gray Tuesday when he saw her again. He was at a corporate innovation summit, bored out of his mind, half listening to a panel discussion, until the next speaker's name flashed across the screen. Keynote: Human-Centered Growth in Tech, Nicole Rivers, Chief Strategy Officer, Viridian Solutions. For a moment he thought he'd misread it. But then she walked onto the stage. She looked different, more confident, poised. Her voice steady as she spoke to a room full of executives who hung on her every word. She was radiant. Brian barely heard her presentation, something about customer empathy and long-term brand integrity, because all he could think was she did it. She'd built her own path. She didn't need Aurora. She didn't need him. When the applause faded and she stepped off stage, their eyes met across the crowd. For a second, the world seemed to stop. Then she gave him the faintest smile, polite, distant, unreadable, and turned away to greet another group. Brian stood frozen. He wanted to run to her, to explain everything, to ask for another chance. But this wasn't his moment. It was hers. That night, he went home to an empty apartment, poured a drink, and stared out at the skyline. She'd done what he couldn't. Walked away, rebuilt herself, and thrived. He admired her for it, loved her even more for it. And for the first time, he understood what real strength looked like. It wasn't staying to fight battles that didn't deserve you. It was knowing when to let go. Still, somewhere deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't finished. He'd built his entire life trying to live up to someone else's expectations. Now, for the first time, he was ready to build something for himself. And maybe, if fate allowed, find her again. It had been nearly a year since the summit. Aurora Dynamics was thriving under Brian's leadership, at least on paper. Profits were up, innovation was back on track, and the media called him the youngest CEO to stabilize a post-scandal corporation. But behind the perfect headlines, something felt hollow. Every success reminded him of what he'd sacrificed. He had the power his father always wanted him to have, but not the peace. Late at night, after the board meetings and the endless dinners, he'd catch himself scrolling through tech magazines, searching for her name. And he always found it. Nicole Rivers, the rising star of Viridian Solutions. Every article praised her vision, her empathy, her leadership. He couldn't help but smile. She'd become everything she was meant to be. But the ache in his chest never went away. One Friday evening, Brian stayed late in his office, staring at a blank document titled Aurora 2.0. He was supposed to outline the company's next big step, a new initiative that would shape their future. But all he could think about was how much of the company's soul had disappeared. He looked around his father's old office, the heavy oak desk, the expensive art, the view that stretched across the skyline. It all felt borrowed. He realized with sudden clarity that none of it was his. He hadn't built this place, he'd inherited it. And he was tired of living in someone else's shadow. 2 weeks later, Brian called an emergency board meeting. "I'm resigning," he said simply, his voice calm, steady. The room went silent. "Excuse me?" asked one of the directors. "You're stepping down? After everything we've invested, this company will be fine without me," he said. "It was never really mine to lead." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "It's time I build something of my own." And with that, he walked out of the glass tower that had defined his entire life. He spent the next 3 months quietly working out of a small rented space downtown. No assistants, no luxury offices, no board of directors watching his every move. Just him, a whiteboard, and an idea. He called it Nova, a tech consultancy focused not on profits or shareholders, but on people, a company built around the same principles Nicole had once presented in that keynote: human-centered growth. Every decision he made, every design he drew up, he thought of her voice, calm, clear, passionate. She had taught him that leadership wasn't control. It was connection. When the prototype of his first project was ready, he knew exactly who he wanted to show it to. He rehearsed the message a dozen times before sending it. To Nicole at Viridian. Subject: Nova. You once told me that real innovation starts with empathy. I finally understand what you meant. Would you meet me? Just once. I'd like your opinion, not as a former colleague, but as someone whose insight I trust more than anyone's. Brian. He didn't expect an answer, but 2 days later one arrived. From Nicole Rivers. You have 10 minutes. Tomorrow. Viridian HQ. The next afternoon, he stood in the sleek glass lobby of Viridian Solutions, nerves gnawing at him in a way they hadn't in years. Nicole appeared at the top of the staircase, just as composed as ever, though her expression was unreadable. "Brian," she said, extending a hand. "You look different." He smiled faintly. "Less corporate? More human." They sat in a small conference room. He handed her his tablet, showing her the presentation Nova, a company focused on sustainable tech partnerships for small businesses. As she scrolled, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is good. Really good." "Thanks," he said quietly. "I wanted to do it right this time." She looked up. "And you're doing this on your own?" "Completely. No board. No family. Just me. Nicole studied him for a long moment. That's a big change for you. I needed it, he admitted. I spent years trying to prove something to my father. Then I spent months trying to forget you. Both were mistakes. Her gaze softened. Brian. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to see what you inspired. And maybe to ask if you'd consider being part of it. Nicole blinked. You want me to join your company? He nodded. Not as my employee, as my partner. Someone who challenges me. Someone who reminds me what matters. For a long time, she didn't speak. Finally, she said, You know what I thought when I saw you at that summit? He shook his head. I thought you'd finally become the man your father wanted you to be. And I hated that, because the man I fell for wasn't perfect or polished. He was passionate, messy, and brave. Brian smiled faintly. Then I guess it's a good thing I stopped trying to be perfect. Nicole looked down at his proposal again, tracing the logo with her finger. This idea, it could change things. For a lot of people. That's the goal, he said softly. Change something that matters. And what if it fails? Then at least it'll fail for the right reasons. Their eyes met, and something in the air shifted. That familiar electricity, softened now by time and forgiveness. A few weeks later, Nicole joined Nova as co-founder. They worked side by side again, not as boss and employee, but as equals. They argued, laughed, stayed up late brainstorming like they used to. But this time, there were no secrets, no power dynamics, no fear of who might see. One evening, after closing a deal with their first major client, they went out to celebrate. Sitting on the rooftop of a small cafe, city lights flickering below, Nicole raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. Brian clinked his glass against hers. And to second chances. She smiled. Funny how everything started with a complaint. He chuckled. Yeah, the best complaint I ever received. Nicole laughed, shaking her head. You know, if someone told me back then that I'd end up co-founding a company with the guy I once reported to HR, you'd have filed another complaint? He teased. Exactly. They both laughed, and the sound felt like closure, like the end of a storm. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain, the same rain that had once fallen the night they first kissed. Brian reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm glad you came back. Nicole squeezed his fingers gently. I didn't come back, she said. You just finally caught up. And for the first time, both of them felt at peace. Not because their story had come full circle, but because they'd grown into the people they were always meant to be.